All right, welcome everyone. Good morning to everyone that has an opportunity to tune in and watch this roundtable discussion on diversity. Uh, and the discussion topic in particular is on microaggressions and how they impact members of the legal community. I am Gordon Weeks. I'm the Executive Chief Assistant in the Public Defender's Office and the Democratic Public Defender-elect in Broward County. I'm going to allow each panelist to introduce themselves, starting with Trelvis.
Thank you, Gordon. My name is Trelvis Randolph. I am the president of the Wilkie D. Ferguson Jr. Bar Association, which is the Black Lawyers Association of Miami-Dade County. I am a civil litigator. I'm a partner with the law firm of Quinteros, Prieto, Wood, and Boyer, which is the largest minority and women-owned law firm in the country. Thank you, and I appreciate being here.
Great to have you. And Catherine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Smith, and I'm a professor of law at the University of Denver Stern College of Law, where I've been on the faculty there for 16 years. And I started teaching at Texas Southern, the Thurgood Marshall School of Law in 2000. I am just now exiting the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Denver Stern College of Law after 10 years, and having being amazing, my amazing colleague Lexi Freeman will be stepping into that position, and so keep your eye out for her. She's phenomenal. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. L'Oreal.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is L'Oreal Arscott. I am the immediate past president of the Wilkie D. Ferguson Jr. Bar Association and the past president of the Gwyneth Cherry Black Women Lawyers Association. I'm also the owner and principal of the LA law firm here in Miami.
Great having you. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts as well. Ms. Moy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moy Ogilvie. I am a partner at the law firm of McCarter & English. I'm in the Hartford office of McCarter. I'm a litigation attorney, a partner, and I'm also the partner in charge of diversity and inclusion at McCarter.
Well, with this wonderful panel of very accomplished professionals, I'm looking forward to having this conversation on race, microaggressions, but importantly, why are we here? How do we get to the point where we need to have this conversation? I think with the backdrop of George Floyd killing and having that being recorded and watching the life of human being seep out in front of the world, I think it crystallized in many people's mind the need to have some serious conversations about race in this country. And as legal professionals, we are entrusted with a great responsibility of trying to shape the law and how it intersects with communities. So with that being said, I'm going to throw the floor open to anyone that wants to talk about the concerns of microaggressions, how you have perceived them, whether your concerns have been dismissed or ignored, and how do they intersect with us in the legal profession?
I guess I would start with, I think for all of us, we know exactly what a microaggression is, right? And we experience it regularly. And I don't even know if sometimes the broader population understands what it is or what the term is, and certainly how it can impact individuals of different groups, whether it's racial or women or what have you. And I think that I found that with all the discussions going on, we really have to kind of go back to the beginning. And so microaggressions, it's a term that is used to describe casual, almost daily types of comments or statements that unintentionally or even intentionally actually reflects biases against or about certain groups. So I think I think we have to kind of go all the way back and start at the beginning so everyone understands. And I think when you talk about microaggressions, it seems so innocent and so harmless, but it's the repeated nature of hearing similar comments or expectations or questions that ultimately really impact the receiver of those types of comments.
It's so very true. And I'm glad you are focusing us on, let's start the conversation on defining and describing what microaggressions are. I describe them myself as the lived experience of a Black person in this society, the lived experience as a Black professional in the legal profession. It's the daily small bits of trauma that we all are subjected to overtly or subtly in our daily lives and in our profession. Anyone else want to describe how they would describe microaggressions to everyone else? Trelvis.
I think that it is behavior that has been so ingrained within a person that they either choose to ignore the impact of the behavior, or is something that they have just done for such a long period of time that they don't recognize that there is a behavior that's being, put out there, and the impact of that behavior on others. I think that it is either, something that is done deliberately as a power play, or something that's done with willful ignorance as to the actions and the impact of those actions upon others, who are the subject of those actions.
Yeah, I'd say I so agree with what everyone has so eloquently stated in terms of microaggressions, and just would add that for those who would like to do some additional reading, I think one of the first articles about microaggressions, Professor Peggy Davis at NYU Law School wrote an article, a law review article that's in Yale Law Review. And I don't have the site, but if you put in Peggy Davis microaggressions, Yale Law Review, it will come up. And I think it's an excellent place to start. And there's plenty of literature as well now over the course of those years. We've been talking about it for a very long time. And I think that's the frustration that we're seeing, especially with young people on college campuses, really pushing their administrations to do something about just how pervasive microaggressions are and continue to be, despite this history of calling it out and trying to address it.
I think that also we should be mindful of the fact that when we talk about microaggressions, we are not, saying that it is something that is small or something that is not as significant as, let's say, a macroaggression. When we refer to microaggressions, we're talking about that person-to-person contact or relationships. And macroaggression is the broader scope, or the institutionalized, aggressions that we have to face when we're talking about that. So I think that's something else that we also need to keep in mind.
L'Oreal.
Thank you, Gordon. I was just going to add, I tend to agree with Catherine. This is not a novel concept that we're discussing. It's a concept that has been around, but it's just been known by different nomenclature, right? So when we talk about implicit bias, we are talking about microaggressions that we transfer onto other folks. So when we talk about dog whistle politics, we're talking about microaggressions. But for a very long time, the larger community didn't really understand dog whistle politics as the African-American community or the minority community in general has, and how we've not only lived this experience, as you pointed out, but how when we voiced or articulated the experiences that we lived, we were often shunned or criticized for being overly sensitive. So the resurgence, or this acceptance in light of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, is just pushing this concept to the forefront. But this is not a novel concept. So I'm excited that we're discussing it. I love to hear from Catherine that college students are actually championing this cause. But this is very evident of the saying that there's nothing new under the sun. We've been discussing this. Now we need to take it to the next step, address it, tackle it, kill it, so that we don't have to discuss it anymore.
It's so great talking to professionals that are learned in this particular area, because what I'm taking away from the conversation is, we may call it microaggressions, but the real impact is systematic, sustained trauma that Black folks live with every day, that Black professionals endure on many different levels in confronting and interacting and intersecting with the legal profession. It's akin to how, folks describe death by 1,000 cuts. And over time, the impact, the trauma that we endure as a people can sometimes be minimized when, like you said, L'Oreal, folks think, because we raise the issue that we're overly sensitive about it. You had a Black president, you've arrived as Black people. Why do we have to talk about these things? You look at all of you professionals in wonderful esteemed positions of authority. There's no issues, but are there really issues? And I throw that back to everyone on the panel.
And the fact that we had a Black president, one Black president in the history of this nation, is clearly evidence of the fact that we need to discuss this. So it is very interesting when folks try to minimize the argument and appear to be oblivious to this country's shameful history of racism and how it has treated the others. But unless we are earnest in how we tackle those issues, we are going to continue to spin and perpetuate these wills. And it's interesting to me too, when we talk about the trauma that we endure and how we are affected by that trauma, one of the things Moy pointed out to is the microaggressions. The key of the microaggressions is how we are impacted by the indignities that we suffer, right? And how we fit in these different boxes. So Catherine, Moy, and I are clearly African-American women. One of the things that we have to deal with, well, one of several, is the double bind of being a woman and being an African-American in America. As a Black woman, we're put in a certain box and we're viewed by society in certain lights. And one of the boxes that we are put in is this issue of aesthetics or beauty. The prevalent thing that's catching on now is your hair, right? The Crown Act. This morning, interestingly enough, on Good Morning America, they were talking about this movement regarding natural hair and how now, in light of the COVID situation, African-American women are feeling free to explore their natural hair and to let their curls run free. The fact that we even have to contemplate exploring our natural hair, or the fact that only less than 10 states in the union have adopted the Crown Act, and the fact that we can still be fired and not have a right to sue for employment discrimination if I decide to dread my hair and wear locks. This is 2020, and that is problematic. But these aspects of systemic racism are brushed under the counter, or under the rug, excuse me, and they are not addressed because we are humbling ourselves. I'm going to say this one quick story, and then I'm going to pass you back the mic. Ironically enough, as I'm watching Good Morning America getting dressed this morning, the hats that we all wear, I'm getting ready for a hearing this morning. I debated with myself whether or not I should put my hair in a bun to make my colleagues feel more comfortable. And because I recall the comments that folks have told me the difference between my straight hair and my curly hair. As a Black woman, these are the things that we have to consider. I'm also reminded constantly of whether or not my performance in court, was I too aggressive? Am I the angry Black woman? Did I clearly articulate my position? Did I do a disservice to my client because of my passion for my client? Are these things that other groups have to consider? I don't know. But these are things that we have to consider because we wear the double bind.
And that is so real. And it is the reason why we're having this conversation. I too know the feeling of being judged by how you present. And for many of you that are on the call, and for those of you that are going to watch on the interwebs, I too had locks all the way down my back. And I remember going through that transformation as a lawyer before the courts and having in the back of my mind, am I going to be perceived differently because of the crown and the locks that I wear? Those are the realities. Those are the aggressions, the traumas that we have to endure merely because of who we are, the color of our skin, and how society has painted some depiction of Black folks and Black professionals. So I applaud you for sharing that personal story. I hope people hear it and they take away some self-reflection on that. Professor, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I actually would. I mean, I want to thank both of you for sharing your story, and I think L'Oreal really hit it on the head and hit the nail on the head in terms of what we grapple with. And I think connected to the earlier question of and L'Oreal's point that we've been dealing with this for a very long time. You know, the hair, the Crown Act and the hair issues once again is similar. I mean, the case Rogers versus American Airlines was decades ago. Of a Black woman who sued because she was terminated because of her hair, natural hair, and the way that, you know, hair grows out of her head, and the you know, these challenges have been around. And I think that's the one point I'd make in terms of people who are watching this in their corporate, you know, offices or from their law firms, and especially for white people, is that these are things that we experience early on in life as Black people, or whatever the group dynamics, majority, minority group dynamics are. And we're aware of those things that are happening in the room. And when we raise it, it might be that it's the first time they've heard it. And they can, you know, there's this defensive posture and a response, but what they don't understand is that we've seen it for decades. We've lived it. And so it's this strange, and that's for the people that are, I'm speaking for people that are willfully ignorant, like Trelvis said earlier, not the outright racist that's yelling racial epithets, you know, just, but for the people that are just now, they hear it, you know, we're saying these things publicly. Before, a lot of times, you know, decades ago, it might have just been all of us Black people talking to each other. But now that it's coming into the forefront and it's being said, or if you raise it in your workplace, it's just really the disconnect. And I think that's the power of segregation, is that we literally have a space where some people have been able to live their entire lives and not have even thought about their race or thought about the statement that they say about somebody's hair, or that they're, you know, articulate, implying that somehow Black people are, and they don't describe other people, white people, that way. Those are the things that I think the hurdles we have to overcome. And I think it's really about education and people who aren't in the minority group, you know, and we're seeing that now, is people doing their own work for themselves, reading about the history of racism in this country and understanding and knowing it. And then I'll stop. The second thing I'll say is that education piece, but also understanding that there might be things in life that you can't have an opinion about or know about. And I think that's a challenge for people who've lived their entire lives with the privilege of being able to speak, thinking that they can talk about almost everything or anything, and not be challenged on it, or having some sort of experience and not realizing that there might be an experience that they can't imagine, and they might just have to stop and listen. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Great points. Great points. Moy, I see you were nodding your head in agreement, and I know you wanted to jump in there.
Oh yeah, I mean, with everything that you have all said, L'Oreal, all of you, and the hair thing, it's funny that we can spend so much time talking about hair, but we realize how much impacts us all in a way that it doesn't others. It took me over 10 years as an attorney to feel comfortable braiding my hair and wearing my hair to work. And what actually finally inspired me was two younger associates who came in with their hair in dread, male. Like these two males came in, they were confident and whatever, and everyone's like, oh, they look so wonderful. And I'm like, they could just come in and do this so easily. And it took me, honestly, over 10 years to do it. And the day I did it, a partner, a nice guy, this was 20 years ago in my prior firm, and he said, oh my goodness, I like your hair. Did you just come back from vacation? And I thought, what? And then I realized that he's thinking of Bo Derek, which is a really old reference for the young people. But I'm like, but for us, that's our life. Like we don't, this is how we are raised, and we do it not for even necessarily style, but for practicality and time saving. And it's just interesting that there is so much stuff about our culture that others are not aware about and don't care to know about, frankly. And also the idea, it gets all to like, are you in a place where you feel like you can bring your authentic self to school, to work, to what have you? And we would hope in the legal industry that we would be the leaders on this, and that, our employees and our attorneys and whatever do feel comfortable bringing themselves to work, particularly because the things that they want to express or show have nothing to do with their capability and their intelligence and all of that. And it's these irrelevant things that we use almost to hold people back for no reason. And so it's just interesting that L'Oreal brought that point up, and then we all have stories around it. And I do think, again, at the end of the day, we all want to work in places where we can be the best lawyers that we can be, the best workers that we can be, and not be judged on things that are relevant and have nothing to do with our abilities and our potential.
Great points, but I want to shift it to this conversation. How many of us have endured or encountered the small or the what we perceive as the not overt aggression, and we didn't confront it? And I know for my own self, I have to say to myself, is it for me to go and educate every single person on every single instance where they have shown that they have some implicit or internal bias that they need to work out or deal with? And then you carry that because it starts building up in you and building up in you, and you keep encountering it, maybe from a different person or different instance in your office or your profession or even in the supermarket. And then eventually you get to the point where you engage and it comes out, the trauma that you've been holding, the trauma that you've been enduring, the buildup of the aggression. It's like those little small mosquito bites over and over and over, to the point where now your body is in shock because it has had so much trauma, and you confront it. How many of us have gone through that? And do folks realize that when they see the confrontation of multiple instances, yes, that is sometimes layered in a level of anger and disappointment in the people around you, that I have to take on this and explain to you what you should already know? Anybody else have that feeling, Trelvis?
I was going to say that, a lot of it depends on your environment, your work environment. Are you in a work environment where it's considered a safe space for you to air what's going on with you? Certainly, you don't want things to build up to the point to where it becomes a poison inside of you. You don't want things to build up to where, it just becomes so unbearable that it becomes to have an effect on you, mentally, physically, and on all of that. But you also want to be in a work environment, if it's happening at your job, to where if there is an issue, you can address it. Not so much confront it, but address it. Meaning there is a mechanism in place, or a process or procedure, or a comfort level, or a feeling of a safe space to where you can address something that is affecting you or affecting others. And it depends on what it is, and if it's something that is you feel, okay, well, this is a one-time thing, you know, it's not something that is within the nature or character of that person to take it that way, you know, I can give them that one off. But when it happens over and over again, then you have to think to yourself, okay, is this by design or is this like, you know, something else? So, you know, you have to be mindful of where you are and how these things happen. I would like to think that everyone is in a work environment where when these things happen, you can tap into the act and either address it or confront it as needed in order to effectuate change. I mean, because there's a certain responsibility or onus upon us to say, hey, this is not okay for these reasons. And, you know, we get so much flack, not about the situation that causes us grief, but how we respond to that situation. And more people want to focus on the response rather than the root cause. So we have to be mindful of the fact that we have to make ourselves and make our grievances known. We have to put that out there before it becomes so bad and so dangerous that the only response is something that is not within our nature or character. So we have to, you know, there's a burden upon us to figure out the way to address that. But the whole burden is not upon us because we have to be in an environment where addressing that does not cause harm or damage to us.
I sometimes, well,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I often, not really sometimes, I often fluctuate between blissful ignorance and just picking and choosing my battles. Sometimes things happen that I don't even catch. Was it insult or was a slight or macroaggression until after the fact. And then other times it's very blatant, but it's not for me to correct your ignorance or your misconceived or ill-conceived notions. So different examples. I think a lot of us on the line could attest to those stories where we walked into depositions, motion calendars, and may have been mistaken for the court reporter or the litigant instead of counsel. As an early lawyer, I was at the courthouse up in Broward County, leaving court, and it was around the holiday time. I think it was right around Christmas time. And I'm leaving court on a case, and in the elevator, not even opposing counsel, another random attorney in the building, an older white gentleman, was like, "Oh man, your boss is making you come and work on the holidays, huh?" And I'm like, "I am the boss." I didn't catch it until, like, you know, after the fact, like, "Oh, you poor little," okay. I've had other instances where I walk into a deposition and I'm mistaken for the litigant. I have other instances where I work with colleagues, well-meaning colleagues, and again, back to the hair thing, you know, I come in one day and my hair is freshly pressed and it's like, "Oh, your hair looks amazing. I think I like your hair better straight." And they don't see how that is a bit problematic for us. So I didn't even catch at the time that "I think I like your hair straight" is a bit of an insult to my natural curls. And let's not even say why your opinion should be valued as such. We won't even touch that one. But it didn't dawn on me at the time that it was an insult. It felt like a compliment because it came from a genuine place and you didn't mean anything by it. So in that instance, it's not, I'm blissfully ignorant. It's not worth the battle. So like Trelvis just pointed out, even if you let that pot simmer and you boil over, folks are never gonna know what happened to get you to that level. They're just gonna see you boil over. And again, back to the double bind of me being a woman and a Black woman, I am expected to behave in a certain manner. And I can never give you what you expect. I have to always meet and exceed society's expectations. This is not Real Housewives. This is real life. So Black women are often perceived as caricatures on these reality shows, and they expect us to behave as such. The issue is that we are all professionals. It would be outside of my professional character to behave as a caricature on a real life show. So despite the fact that internally, we may be having a whole different type of conversation, externally, peace be with you, God bless you, and we keep it moving.
And the reason I'm happy that Trelvis raised that point, and I was trying to get to this area of conversation, Catherine and Moy, you know, it's somewhat of an aggression in and of itself for us always having to take the high road, for us always having to pick and choose the battles, for us always having to do the woosah, and letting it out. That is a frustration. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. I think L'Oreal and you've just mentioned it's a lot to put on us all the time, and frankly, we're busy, right? We're trying to be lawyers. We're trying to do our jobs. We're trying to have our own personal lives and what have you. So to always have the responsibility to correct and educate, that can be a lot. And at different phases in your life or different days, you do have to pick your battles. And like, so for now, I feel that, for example, I'm speaking up way more now than I would have maybe 5 or 10 years ago, because I've been going through this for so long. And I also, and I know all of us understand the importance of doing it from all of those who are behind us. And we're so frustrated that they're experiencing the same thing, you know, that we experienced 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I think that I don't think we should be expected to educate everyone. I think everybody takes their turn and does it when it works for them and in their life, in their work life, etc. I think Trelvis made a great point about your work environment too. And part of it is your work environment should ultimately be your safety zone, right? No matter where you work, if you're there for long enough, that should be your home and where you feel comfortable. And you know, at our firm, we did the social justice project at McCarter, but so part of it was to do stuff externally, working on criminal justice and housing issues or whatever. But an important part of the project that we see going forward is working on our internal education. So we're not going to educate all of our staff and attorneys, but we're going to say, hey, here's the movie, John Lewis, Good Trouble. This might be helpful for everybody to watch, so you can learn a little bit about his life and what voting right issues are, you know. And then the way we launched it was 3 of us, 3 Black females, we decided that we would, with our task force, we decided for our launch, we were going to talk to the firm about our experiences being Black female attorneys and just being Black in America. And we had a town hall with over, you know, each session was over 250 people listening to us just talk honestly about our experiences. And we had to make ourselves very vulnerable to do that, right? But I think we were able to do that because we knew it was important for us to share with our colleagues and for them to truly understand what is going on in America and who best to hear it from than from us. And everybody's not going to be able to do that. And we just felt that we were going to speak up on behalf of everybody who needed us to speak up at that moment. And the feedback that we got from our colleagues from, you know, we're over 9 offices up and down the East Coast, was tremendous. And, you know, people just saying, you know, to, I think a point that was made earlier, like just because there's a Black president or a few Black attorneys in your department or in your law school or whatever, does not mean everything is fine, and does not mean that they don't face challenges just because they don't talk about it and scream about it every day. And we were able to share, this is what we go through. This is our normal life. And no, we don't want pity, but this is what we do. And this is what all Black attorneys do, all attorneys of color, women attorneys, Black professionals, Black people in America. This is just what, these are examples. And I think because they were hearing it from us, from people who they know and care about, it brought it home in a different way than reading about it or hearing someone complain about it on the news, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the more of us that speak up and speak out in different ways, from the students to all of us trying to do what we can, little by little, it's going to be hard for others not to listen, and it's going to be their choice as to what they want to do with what they're hearing.
Great points. Catherine, do you have any follow-up? Or
Sure, yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and I think it's so helpful to hear this. It's a part of one of the coping strategies, right? I talk about is having community and people to process this with, so you know you're not alone. But I think that for me, I am in the place where I agree with everyone that it's contextual, and it really is about when do you challenge, because if you were challenging all the time, you would never get anything else done. I mean, you just wouldn't. Not just raising it, but dealing with the person's response because they're so defensive and cannot hear it. I mean, the book, I know White Fragility just nails it. And I know other people have been saying that as well, not just in the book, but it's a shorthand. And I know a lot of people are reading it. It just nails it because you don't have time to try and convince this person something that as a matter of fact that you've lived for 45 years and you heard about from your family members generations, and it's just exhausting. You're like, okay, I don't have 5 hours to get you to move this much on this. Okay. I got lots of things to do. And so I feel like it's contextual. I now at this point, I mean, it was my job for 10 years to work on these issues.
can I interrupt and say this?
Yeah, sure.
All the panelists laughed in agreement because we all have been there.
Yeah.
Where we say, am I going to invest all of this to get you to move this far?
Yeah.
You've hit it on the nail on its head.
Yeah. It's like, no. And it's contextual. And I guess the way to shorthand it, I'd just say, if it's some random person I run into in the store, absolutely not. If it's my colleagues, sometimes, because I'm worried about our students and other people that are interact with, and I have an obligation because the school is, I work there. But even that gets exhausting, and so I'm doing less of that. And it's really about people in my very close in space that I value, and if they say something and I feel like, well, I'm not going to be able to truly be tight with them if we don't have this conversation. That's probably the most likely time that I'm going to have that conversation, engage and try. And if they're true friends, we're going to get past it. If they shut down because of their own inability to hear it, then it might mean that relationship is going to have to subside, or I'm in that relationship and it's not the close inner concentric circle, but the outer, and I might enjoy that person to go for a run with or whatever it may be, but they're not going to be my bestie, so that's one thing. One thing I'll add, and I hope we get a chance to talk about, because I know I'm meeting up a lot of time. I want to talk, I think this is an interesting generational moment, because speaking of spending all your time doing it, and is it our responsibility? I've felt like it was my responsibility my whole life. And I'm so liberated to be no longer feeling that way. My parents didn't talk a lot about race because they thought that was going to insulate me from it. That didn't work. I talk a lot about race and I feel exhausted. And so I'm thinking about my daughter who's 16 and what the message I'm sending her. And I'll just say, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about it. I'm really interested right now in what are the coping strategies I give her, number one, to build armor going into this, and have been trying to figure that out since she's very little because it starts early. And number two, what is her obligation? And I don't want to saddle her with what I think was mine, right? I'm like, no, it's not your job. You do your thing. You can spend that time writing poems or whatever you like to do. Don't feel like that's your responsibility. I don't want to place that on her. So, but anyway, I'll stop there.
I'm so happy you raised that issue because I have young children as well, entering into teenage years. And as a parent, I've grappled with how much of a burden do I put on them because they see daddy, and they see how I have interacted and intersected with race in the community. And sometimes you say to your children, your Black children, um, I would hope that you would go into a world with the privilege that every other child would have. Um, and but I, like you said, the armor to deal with how the world is going to perceive you or interact with you. And that is a unique position that Black families have to deal with. It's one thing to live in a world of privilege and never have to have armor, but we have to prepare our children to go into a world where their first interaction with law enforcement may be at a traffic stop, or at a basketball court where police officers arrive, and they have to know how to encounter and deal with and survive that interaction. That's a whole nother area of trauma that we live, as Black people, as parents, as professionals. It is real and it's painful. I'm glad you shared that, because I grapple with it as well. And what I'm hearing from this conversation is the small spaces that we create amongst each other through trust is what's going to move the conversation forward, and propel our law firms, our law schools, our courts, to be more open to dealing with racial issues on a whole. So what I'm going to ask you is, how do we create these small places of safety, of trust, where you can decide, I'm going to engage and try to bring this person along because they're worth it, because this institution is worth it, because what I'm doing is worth it to bring them along. How do we do that?
I think that when you listen to the conversations that are being put out here today, and you listen to the points that L'Oreal, Catherine, and Moya are making, there's a lot of pressure that seems to be put on us as Black people to bear this burden. And I think that is something that is, number one, it's unfair. Number two, is untenable. And number three, it can be alleviated. We spend, as professionals, we spend most of our day in the office. We spend most of our day in that time, in that space. That space is created by, for most part, other people. You decide what furniture you want to have. You decide what stationery you want to have. You decide how the design of the office is. You can also make decisions about the environment that you create, that other people are going to be occupying. And, there is a burden, it should be a burden on businesses to make sure that they, accept the fact that this is an issue that needs to be dealt with. You have to create these safe spaces for your employees. I mean, you want to make sure they have health insurance, make sure they have dental insurance, making sure they have vacations, but also make sure that they have safe spaces to deal and talk with these issues, and be willing to have those awkward conversations with those people who are perpetuating these microaggressions. You have to be able to have a system within the business to deal with this. I remember at one of the places I used to work with, where there was a diversity, group created, and it was composed of 4 white guys. And they came to me and they say, well, Trelvis, we want to have your input on it. I know that you're involved with all these different organizations. Can you give me the contact information of those organizations so that we can deal with it? And, that's not solving the problem. That's adding to the problem. So recognize that, there is a solution out there, but you have to be part of the solution. You have to be willing to expend the energy to take the burdens off of the employees to deal with this. Because if you are a sole Black person at a majority-owned firm, you don't have actionable power there. And you may not be put in places and in situations where you can effectuate change. And if no one is willing to acknowledge that there's an issue, who's going to address that issue? Who's going to create that space to where that issue can be properly addressed and disseminated throughout the rest of the environment? So there is an onus on businesses and corporations to make sure that they are dealing with this, and all of the pressure, all the burden doesn't fall upon the Black employees.
So greatly said. Anyone else want to add to that or offer any suggestions?
Yeah, I think that we may need to shift the perspective in the sense that we probably need to focus on how we as a community are creating those safe spaces. Similar to Catherine's point earlier, the shared experiences, right? So if we shift our focus and we think about how we cultivate safe spaces for us to share these experiences, then I think that that in turn will trickle into affecting the larger community or your individual workplace. So by that, what I mean is the bar organizations, for example, the Gwyneth Cherry Black Women Lawyers Association, clearly specifically for Black women, the Wilkie D. Ferguson Junior Bar Association, the first Black Bar Association in Miami-Dade County, and we're just talking about Miami. No offense, Broward, we're just talking about Miami right now. So just using those two as examples. Those organizations, for example, were created to cultivate this sense of community for Black lawyers. It was specifically designed to make sure that we advocate for equality and inclusion into the profession, and then we provide our members with the professional resources that they need, but with the brotherhood and sisterhood that they need to survive this profession as well, right? So that safe space for the profession. By getting us together as like-minded people in this safe space to discuss these shared experiences, now I could talk to Catherine and I could say, oh, okay, I'm not the only one who was mistaken for the court reporter. That is crazy. How did you handle that? And now we can figure out how to navigate these circumstances. We can also figure out how to get more people into that firm where I am the only partner, or I am the only one in the firm who looks like me. Once we start infiltrating these spaces and there are more of us there, I think inherently that's going to change and shift the dynamic, because now folks are being exposed to different experiences that they weren't before. By folks, I mean the larger community. So the larger community is now exposed to not only one Black girl with natural hair, but two Black women who decide to do whatever they want to do with their hair. It sounds basic and simplistic, but the idea is if we strengthen the community within, if we begin to have these conversations and safe spaces within, then we transfer those experiences to the outward community. And then we have those conversations with our children. The choice words that Catherine used were so interesting to what armor are you giving them and what's their obligation? Like Trelvis said, these are conversations that other folks are not having. This is a burden that the other community is not having. And as a parent, I'm in the same boat as you are, Gordon, and as you are, Catherine, and my children are much younger, right? I have little ones, but they are very much in tune with the world around us, and they do not understand why someone doesn't like them just because of their skin color. And I don't know how to explain that to them, because I also didn't have those types of conversations with my mother. My mother never said that there would be any impediment to my success or me achieving anything that I wanted to achieve. She did say that folks are not going to like you because of the way that you look. I don't know what she meant by that until later in life. And then I understood it. But that's not what I want to tell my children. You can do whatever you want to do. But I do also have to tell them, son, if you get pulled over by law enforcement, this is what you have to do. Trelvis and I did a panel a couple of weeks ago. We had the great H.T. Smith and Don Horn, fabulous storytellers, and we were analyzing the films When They See Us and Just Mercy. To say that it was difficult for me to sit through those films was an understatement. It was more difficult of the fact that knowing that those were real life experiences. And again, as a mother, it just made me nauseous. I'm not going to relive it. But part of the conversation that we had during that panel was having those conversations with your children to prepare them for the road ahead, and how traumatic that conversation is to have with your children, and what are we setting them up for? Like you said, Gordon, that's a whole conversation for another time. And of course, us being in South Florida, we have such a diverse community. My Jamaican husband had never had to have that conversation because he grew up in an island where everybody looked like him and everybody in power looked like him. That's not the experiences that our children are having. So how do we prepare them with the armor, and what obligation are they going to have going forward? Those are conversations that we need to have internally in our safe spaces so that we can move forward for the next generation.
And to that point about conversations and children and thinking of children more broadly, I mean, I look forward to the time that we can talk to our Black law students and prepare them in a way that we would prepare any other mentees that we have who are not Black, right? Like, if I'm being honest, I have a different conversation with my mentees who are Black, who are trying to get the internships and go into the firms and do all of that stuff than I do with mentees who are not Black. And that's just the reality, because their reality is different. So I know that we all want a day where we don't have those conversations anymore, right? With regard to entering the legal profession and making sure that these young law students and pre-law students have the armor on that they need. And I think that that is part of our mission as well, right?
And I'm so, it strikes me that the term armor, and I'm so happy that you referenced that, Catherine, because it puts a real perspective on this conversation about microaggressions, because it's akin to me as those little small death by 1,000 cuts, and we have to prepare and live our life with armor to be able to survive all of those 1,000 cuts and allow them to heal, so we can then move on and then take more cuts and heal, move on, take more cuts and heal and move on. So Catherine, I'm going to give it to you to close us up. I know we can talk about this forever. And it's important that we have this conversation. I think it was wonderful. We went through a lot of different topics but we are just scratching the surface. We would have to have these conversations every day for the next 5 years before we really work through these issues. So Catherine, I'm gonna give it to you.
Well, I would like to try and kind of build a bridge from our kids to us and the law students, us as lawyers, and hopefully loop it back around in terms of what lawyers out there can do, and law firms, especially firms that are trying to create change for their lawyers of color. I think that this starts from day one. Yes, our kids, my kids, my coworker now here, 16 in the background, could be in a car and get pulled over. But really, when talking about microaggressions, it starts so early. And I'm just going to give you a quick story. My kid's 4. She's on the playground. She's an African-American. 2 white boys on the playground with her. They find a worm. A debate ensues about who's going to take the worm home. And one of the boys says, and the other confirms, well, the worm will be happier at our house because we're white. That's at 4. And she came home very upset. And so, we can't wait. And it doesn't mean we have to give them explicit information, but I think the first thing that I had to sit down and think about was, how do I protect her? Not from her self-esteem, because she could do 2 things with that. She could go inward and say, I am not as good, or she could go outward at that age. And so I said, well, to protect her self-image, I'm going to have her go outward. I'm going to say, it's really a shame that those parents didn't teach their child about difference or about race or about whatever, that's really sad. And whatever the message was is the message. But the idea was deflect so that it's not about her. And I think that's what some of us have said, right? Is that, for all of us in this process, it's not about us when we hear those statements. It's about that other person and their own either racism, ignorance, or bolstering their own self-image. And the social psychology literature tells that. They're using us in groups and out groups to bolster their own self-image in relation to us. And so that's the first thing. And so I've worked really hard to try and talk about that and flesh that out. And the other, and this, I have a couple others, but I'm gonna just say this one is creating a buffer zone, which we've all been talking about, which is community. And I'm a member of the Black Female Faculty Writing Workshop. It's all Black female law professors, and it's a phenomenal group, and it's been going on for the last like 12, 13 years. And that support network is just unparalleled. And you'll see now there's 23 Black female law deans, at least half of them are coming out of the Black Female Faculty Writing Workshop, because that is helping us survive and thrive and coping and all of these sorts of things. And also figure out strategies on how we deal with, how we educate the rest of our communities about what it means to be African-American, what it means to be experiencing these microaggressions. And I'm gonna say one more thing. It's also that I have to recognize not just when microaggressions are coming at me, but when I'm engaging in them also. And I think that's an education also for me, to know that I am in it. I have agency, I have power and privilege. And when I have that, I need to exercise it well and not just repeat what people in the majority have done to Black people, but also, you know, try and be mindful about when I'm in a position of power in relation to my students or other marginalized groups. So,
you know,
I'll leave it there.
This was a incredible conversation. I thank you all. I hope those folks in the legal profession that have an opportunity to view this take away the very important points that you've all made and articulated. And I hope they recognize the level of vulnerability that each one of us displayed in having this conversation for the betterment of trying to move the profession forward, move the conversation forward, and to have some very real conversations about race. So thank you all. Thank you to law.com for inviting us. And on that note, goodbye.